So welcome to another wargame review from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander.
And I'm Grant.
And today we're taking a look at a new game from Capsisum Games, and also Don't Panic Games, called Fighters of the Pacific. This is a two-player tactical air-naval war game set in the Pacific. Uses hexes, and you go against each other. There is a solo mode, but it's primarily a two-player game. And it is, here are my airplanes, and here are your airplanes, and we go at it. And it's lots of dogfighting, or going after, dropping your dive bombs, and doing torpedo attacks.
Or being sitting ducks as you're
yeah.
trying to bomb aircraft carriers.
It's everything you imagine kind of tactical air combat is, in a very short rule book, easy to learn, and very nice artwork. Really nice package. And this was what, $40?
I think I paid $40 online.
Pretty spicy.
Which is pretty amazing.
Yes.
Because it actually, production-wise, is pretty nice for $40.
Yeah, and it comes with like 10 or 12 scenarios in it. And considering that it uses 8 geomorphic map tiles only, a lot of it is Blue Sea, yes. But like,
as you would expect.
If you look through the scenario book, they offer you a good number of very different tactical situations. So it's not just like the same thing over and over again. Even though mechanically, your dogfighting and your maneuvering is going to be similar, sometimes you are, you're trying to intercept a naval fleet with your bombers. That's what this one was. Sometimes it is just like, hey, here's all the fighters and we're doing a huge dogfight. Sometimes you're going after some island defenses, and then there's reinforcements that are coming in. Different fleet maneuvers that are going on. So
there's a rescue scenario where
is it
one of
like
the
a
aircraft.
pilot?
No, one of the aircraft carriers is like triple hit.
Oh.
And you're trying to get out there with this destroyer, probably before it gets destroyed.
That's cool. But
yeah,
like
kind of different. Unique.
There's a number of different things in here, which for the package that you get, I thought was pretty impressive and very nice.
Oh, yeah.
All of everything in the game is kind of thick cardboard counters. It's not miniatures. I'm sure if you have miniatures at home, you could substitute all of those in.
Yeah, so there's the aircraft carriers.
Yeah.
And they're pretty dope.
They're really nice. The artwork's lovely. But yeah, I think about people who play Blood Red Skies, which are like miniatures. You could substitute all that stuff in pretty easily. And you're like, well, why wouldn't you just play Blood Red Skies? I don't know. This is much easier to teach someone, probably.
Definitely a simpler rule set.
Yeah,
it's
like
pretty
the
basic.
Are literally like 4 pages of actual rules. So it was really easy to like just set up and kind of get going. You have a little reference sheet. This is all the maneuvers that you can do. Yep. And this one is limited to only fighters. And then there are 3 different plane types for each side. So the Japanese had Zeros, Vals, and Kates. And they have, different speeds and armor, and then little special capabilities, and then a firing arc on them. Everything you need to play on the game is right here, basically.
And then the Americans have SPD Dauntless, SPD Devastators, and F4F Wildcats.
Yes.
So those are their 3. And frankly, I think most of the time you're using your SPDs and TBDs, I think, a lot of them.
In this one, you do have a lot of fighters. You have a fighter and 2 bomber types for each of the factions.
Yeah. And there is like F4F Wildcats versus Zeros. And
yeah, the scenario that we just played was you had both of your different types of bombers trying to destroy my surface fleet. Yeah. And I had a carrier's worth of Zeros, and that was it. But I enjoyed playing this game. Again, it was really light, it was really easy to get into, and it took, I think, a couple hours?
I felt like it took a long time, but that scenario was 20 turns, and we actually played...
Which is the longest it can be.
15 of those turns, I think?
Everyone died.
Yeah. It is so interesting because it is a fast-playing game.
Yes, the pace of the game.
There's a lot of depth to it, though. You've got to think about where it is you're going, what capabilities your enemies have. Trying to understand that somewhat slows it down sometimes. And it's not one of those games where I'm literally going to sit here and count out every square, but I did when it mattered.
Yeah.
When it mattered, I was like, okay, I got to make sure I can maneuver out of the way. And I felt a little bad because it was like the pilot said, okay, I'm going to pause my aircraft and I'm going to calculate. So, but you have to do that sometimes.
It's a game, right? There'll be elements of that gaminess in it, but also sometimes the board is very congested with these very large
Mm-hmm.
dogfights, and you're like, you can count as much as you want. It is very difficult to calculate everything
Yeah.
when there's a lot.
I will say this. I did enjoy, particularly in our scenario, we had the boards that had the clouds.
Yes.
The clouds, if you're at high altitude, they protect you.
Yes.
Meaning you can't swoop in, even at my same altitude, and take me out.
Yes.
You cannot fire
You can't shoot in, out,
or out
through.
of. Yeah. But if you're at low altitude, those clouds, and I think I forgot that a couple times. It's like, oh, you can't get me. And it's like, boom, boom, boom.
Yes.
Oh, crap. But I enjoyed trying to maneuver around those and figure out how to best utilize them, but also keeping yourself within bombing and torpedo range of the actual targets. So that was pretty interesting. I enjoyed that aspect of it.
Yes, those were a really neat kind of terrain feature
Yeah.
that you could utilize. And it was, the more we played, the more apparent the strengths of those came into play. And it was
Yeah.
like, yeah, I can't be shot, but I also can't shoot out of it.
I can't do anything.
Which isn't...
Yeah.
But in this, like in a lot of air war games, you've got to, like, you have your speed, and you have to move your whole speed.
Yeah.
You can't sit there and be like, I delay, and just, like, do nothing.
And I like that part of it. I
yeah.
think that's because you've got to move your full speed. It's required, and that's a very cool part of the game. I also really like the various maneuvers that you do have. That they all count as a space. So for instance, diving is free. It actually gets you a space. So I could turn my Dauntlesses into 3-move for just a moment.
Yeah, for that bombing run. It was great.
For that bombing run. But then, boy, climbing takes 2 movement points. That's all of my movement.
Yeah, it's like, ugh.
So you kind of handicap yourself, but you have those options. And that was interesting. There were a couple of times I avoided you by, I'm going to go low. And then knowing, oh gosh, that zero is going to fly right up my tailpipe here in just a second. But I did enjoy that. The concept of the different capabilities of each of the aircraft. And once the Dauntlesses and the TBDs drop their payload, I mean, they become very bad fighters.
Extremely bad fighters, yes.
But frankly, it was kind of funny because a couple of my guys really turned pretty good there for a second because there was a lot of chaos.
Yes.
There was a lot of targets. There was a lot of opportunities. And I kind of found myself, oh, I can get that zero. And I just knocked 3 zeros out of the sky. And that was interesting. It wasn't just about dropping the bombs. It was also about changing your target.
And like many tactical games, this is also a game of activations.
Yeah.
Because you alternate your activations based on air groups, which can be anywhere from 1 to any number of fighters within certain conditions. Mm-hmm. And the initiative player can pass any of their turns that they wish, and the non-initiative player cannot.
And that is a very important part of the game. It really is.
And it's, if I try to shoot a plane that hasn't activated, they must dodge, but that uses up their activation, so they can't do anything later. But it saves them. And so there's a lot of, I'm trying to out-activate someone so that once they're activated, they can't dodge, so you can get them. And so there's a real gaminess to that aspect of it as well, of like, okay, I want to activate these guys over here and leave these guys free to be able to dodge, or you guys have done your moves, I can go in and swoop and get them because they can't. All of that stuff, it's reminiscent of a lot of these other tactical games that I have played. Mm-hmm. But I appreciate, and I'll come back to it, is your speed. You have to move your speed.
Yeah.
Think about something like in X-Wing, you can use little short maneuvers. You can go really slow. In this one, it's like, nah, dude, you're going full tilt over the combat zone.
Yeah.
And so, it's trying to move and get people into your firing arcs and trying to do things, because the combat in this is deterministic. Think about the diceless war games that we spoke about very recently. This is one of them.
You're either in range and in target and dead, or you take a wound.
Yep. And you either got someone or you don't. Mm-hmm. And it makes it a very deadly game.
Yeah.
And the focus is on positioning and flying. And I want that to be the focus of my air war game. Mm-hmm. I don't have like really cool flying and then I shoot a bunch and miss.
Yeah.
right? That's like, cool, we get it, it's a game, but also, I want to reward good flying.
Yeah.
And in this deterministic combat, in this sense, that's what that's trying to model.
And actually, to be honest, I thought that the deterministic combat was very good.
Yeah, well,
I mean,
that's what the game is. It
Yeah.
becomes about the movement and activations,
Yeah.
trying to get someone who's already done, and it was that's a really nice aspect of it.
so it's more about maneuver and positioning
Yes.
than it is about rolling dice. Oh, did I hit or not?
Yeah, there's
And
there's
that-
not, oh, my weapons jam, or oh,
Yeah.
I missed. None of that. Like,
Yeah.
you'll hit if you could get them in your sights.
Yep. And the other cool thing was the Zeros have the M20 cannon, right?
Yes.
Wait, what was that?
Oh, it's a 20 millimeter cannon.
20 millimeter.
You guys have
So they,
that too?
nope, I didn't have it. I don't have any of that. Yep.
No, they do not.
They do not. So that was pretty powerful because the American planes, the bombers, have 2 hits, two armor, right? And so do the Japanese. The Japanese
Yeah,
ones
the bombers
have
are
2.
bigger,
They're
they're
slower,
bulkier.
bigger, but that Zero could get up, and only in that one firing arc,
Yeah, directly.
one
in front
out
of
of
it.
4, it had to be directly in front. It's over. And so trying to maneuver around that's very interesting. Trying to get into position is very interesting. I also really liked because the Dauntlesses are, I mean, they have one front firing arc. It's just the one right in front.
Which is hard to. Yeah, it's
Very
hard,
hard
to get that on target.
You're really trying to get the tail gunner to shoot down these Zeros. So that was pretty cool. I felt like that was a big advantage.
It's a
for
very
me.
different type of flying that you're doing with those.
Yeah. And frankly, I was focused mainly on the ships.
Yeah, that was your goals for the
Yeah,
scenario,
I
right?
wanted to make sure I could drop my bombs. It was interesting because I had 3 different waves, I think. My
Yes.
first wave had 6.
Yeah.
My second wave had 6. And then the big TBDs only had 5. So it was kind of funny. You're not funny, that's a bad word. But you're flying your little group. You're hoping 1 or 2 to get through.
Yeah.
And then somehow dodge into the clouds and then come out of the clouds to make that one attack. So you need to understand you're never going to be dropping all those bombs. You're just not.
Yeah, and that's
There's really no way to avoid
the
it.
Zeros also have this little agile keyword that nothing else in the game has.
Yep.
And it means that they can get this little free rotation at the end of all of their
Puts them
movement.
right into a firing arc.
Really strong.
Yeah.
But you have to
You have to think it through.
you have to either move in a straight line, or like you can only do that rotation in the direction in which you have kind of moved or turned.
Yeah.
So there are some times where you're like, I wish I could break that rule,
Sure.
but you can't.
I wish I could break the rule of only 2 movements.
So it's very strong when you can get that to go,
Oh yeah.
and but you have to plan it real carefully. But it means you can make these really really tight turns on people.
Yeah. But I think that's where this game shines. It's the concept of this is a positioning game.
Yeah.
It's a game of position and getting into firing arc. There's no randomized dice. There's no randomized defense. There's no skills or abilities that's gonna, I'm gonna, whatever, do a tail wag and get out of it. There's none of that. You have to win this game up front by getting in proper position. And conversely, when you're the Americans like I was in this scenario, you got to win this game by getting your ships out of danger's way and into position to bomb,
Yeah.
the Akagi and the Kagumo, and that's what you got to do. So it's almost like we're playing completely different games, and it works. It really works. I also enjoyed playing this. I think as we went along and got more and more familiar with the rules, I'd like to go back now and play it again because I think we would have a very different experience.
Yes.
And that's good. I didn't pass as much as I probably should have. You passed a lot there in a couple, and I was like, "Ooh, that's good. That's really working."
Yes, it can be very strong.
So
And the other thing that was very evident about this game is that once you get into combat, it is extremely difficult to maintain any kind of formation flying.
oh yeah,
But if you can get into formations, it's very strong because that reduces your initiative.
And that's how
and
you
the lower
initiate,
initiative wins and has the option to pass and all this stuff. So
Yeah.
but I was like trying to get guys to group together, and that is
It's
so
hard.
difficult to do.
Well, especially
it was interesting.
especially when you're trying to change altitudes.
Oh
as well.
yeah, that's like
Because two planes, whether they're in the same direction or not, if one's high altitude and one's low, that's two different groups.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense, right? And the other one was the damage planes, so they start adding to your initiative number.
They just always add.
And it's like a handicap. It's like, crap, I've got 3. Just kill them, Alexander. Just kill this plane. But this game, more than a lot of other games, initiative is king. If you have initiative, and keeping that initiative is very important. And I think early in the game, I did a way better job of that than I did kind of 3/4 of the way through. You took initiative, and then I was like, oh, crap, I can't get it back. Very important because you can keep passing.
Yeah, and it makes a big difference. But yeah, what I will do is I will show you how this game works, and then we'll wrap up with a few final thoughts. So here's a look at the board. As you can see, it is just geomorphic hexes laid over. A lot of it is ocean. Some of the backs of these have small islands on them. This one has some cloud cover, and cloud cover is effectively terrain at high altitude. You can think about it that way. Can't shoot into, out of, or through it. But honestly, you have a little sequence of play here, which tells you have to kind of calculate initiative and how to do that. And then you go through alternating activations. If you're the initiative player, you can pass your activation, and there's the gaminess of that. And at the end, there's a little bit of cleanup where you're going to remove certain tokens. If you've got ships, they have to move, mandatory movement. Torpedoes are going to move as well as they track in the water. And then you kind of go again, you recalculate initiative. And you're going to go through a certain number of turns, depending on the scenario. We have a little turn track. And all these little cards are kind of kept off map. The only other play aids that you have outside of this one is you have these, which show you all the different maneuvers that are possible in the game. Not all of them are available to all of them. So this one is for fighters only, is what it says down here. And it tells you the little rules of flight, again, not particularly complicated. And then on here, it specifies the statistics of the 3 different planes available in the core set for each of the nationalities. So we have the Japanese ones here, with the Zero, Val, and Kate, and we have the Wildcat, Dauntless, and Devastator for the US. So how this game works is you're going to calculate initiative, who has the initiative. And initiative is a low score that you're shooting for. And you gain initiative points by having lots of fighters on the map. So you get an initiative point for each group of fighters. They're called air groups, I think they're called. They include bombers. And basically, if you have adjacent fighters or adjacent planes, regardless of how many and in what kind of a shape they look like, right? They could either be like this or any kind of... As long as they're all adjacent and they're all facing the same way, so...
And they have to be the same altitude.
And the same altitude, yes. These are 2 different groups currently. This is one group. This is back to 2 groups. So you're going to calculate, this is one group. Let's say, that's not a Japanese plane. Let's say they had another plane over here who was at low altitude. Because low altitude groups give you 2 initiative points because it is less advantageous. It's a more painful handicap. So here we've got 1 and we've got 2. If we added a 3rd high altitude group, so this is 1 point, this is 2 points, this is 3, 4 points. If any of them are damaged, that is an additional point on top of its regular points that it provides. So currently we're at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the damage counter. And the US, who are... Again, this is the end of a game that we had. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And basically, as you try to gain the initiative, you want to have that lower score, so you'll have better formations and less damaged planes, and having them at higher altitudes, right? Which means they can dive, they have a better kind of combat tactical situation. If you have the initiative, you as the initiative player, and only you, have the option as you alternate activations to pass. And you can pass as many times as you would like. You can take a turn, then the enemy takes a turn, you can pass, they can take a turn, you can take a turn, they take a turn, and you can pass again, or you can just pass like 10 times in a row. You have a lot of control over the timing of when things happen. And it's a really clean, very easy way where to kind of show kind of that tactical advantage that you have, that you can trigger the timings of when certain planes move by out-activating people. In other games, you get into really complicated, every plane has different pilot skills and all these stuff, and it's a really simple system in this one. So you determine initiative, and then, like we said, you go back and forth activating air groups. And an air group is whatever it is at the beginning of the turn. And as things move, they're going to get marked with kind of activation markers, so you can't reactivate people if they, joined a different group, for example. So to move, you're going to move your full speed, and your speed is it is a little 3 or a 2 or a 2. Again, 3, 2, 2. And if we look at the rules of flight, you must move your full speed, and you can never move less than that. You can't stack if you're at the same altitude. However, you can stack if you're at a different altitude. And you can never turn in 2 different directions in a given movement activation. So let's say this guy here, if I was to turn, you move into this hex and then turn facing. What you cannot then do is move forward and then turn into this one like this, because you've turned 2 different directions in too short a period of time in game time, and you'd be like ripping your wings off, breaking the laws of physics. What you can do, though, to perform that is that you can slide. You can slide and you can move forward. What you can't do is slide, 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 for example, because those are in different directions. And if you've got, so for example, the zeros, they have the agile trait, they get a free rotation at the end of all of their movements, which is very strong, but you can only rotate in the direction that you've moved. And so what that enables you to do is to make extremely tight turns, but what it doesn't allow you to do is to slide, going this direction and then turn this direction. You can't kind of, physics doesn't work that way, right? You can't swing out and then fly back in again. This isn't Star Wars X-Wing. But the really genius part of this game is that you have these fields of fire, these arcs, so to speak, and you're going to move into them, and you're going to trigger the opponent to have to dodge out of the way. So, if our arc of fire is these 4 hexes in front of us, I'll set us up here, and let's get a little US plane going on at the same altitude, because you can't shoot someone at a different altitude. Let's say we've moved our movement, 1, 2, 3. These people are in our firing arc. They must dodge out of the way if they have not activated. We mark ourselves that we activate because we have moved. If they have not activated, they have to try to dodge out of the way. And they're going to take any one of these actions to dodge out of the way. So they could advance 1, but they would still be in our field of fire, so they're still going to take a damage. Not great, but we have 20mm cannons on the zeros. They're really strong, and if you're here, you take 2 damage and you kill people outright. Kind of brutal. You could slide, but again, still within the field of fire. You could turn. Problem is still within the field of fire. You could dive. That's going to get you out of the field of fire. Or you can do these cool S turns, which are the split S if you're a fighter only. So these kind of big old hulking slow bomber types can't perform that maneuver. They're not agile enough. And this is basically, you just wig out of there and you dive, but you also get to change direction. And so you're forcing people to break up their formations, which again is something that's really neat. And that, like, in other games, you're like, well, I'll just take the damage and kind of keep going forwards because I want to keep my formation. But in reality, that's not what would happen. The formations would get broken up by energy fighters, and the forcing of this, I think, is a really neat part of the game. If they're still within your field of fire after they have dodged, and dodging also marks them as activated, so it's another way to ping people's activations and to kind of wear them out, because he can't do anything else this turn. If they're still within your field of fire, this guy isn't, then they would take damage. There's no dice rolling for damage, you just take 1 damage. Again, you take 1 damage in any of these arcs of fire, but The Japanese Zeros specifically have this 20mm cannon, and they do double damage if it's this immediately adjacent forward arc. And so you can eviscerate people with your Zeros. It can be very bloody if you can get those to line up. It's a bit more difficult because it's only that one hex, but if you can do it, the payoff's great. Now, again, you start getting into your swarm tactics as well, because then the US player is going to have a turn and they're going to take an activation. If you can get someone to kind of dive forward and then to slide over and to shoot this guy, because he's already activated, he cannot dodge again. So it's that you and your wingman kind of double teaming someone. He can't dodge out of the way, he will die. And you're going to do this back and forth. If you've got torpedo bombers, they have to kind of go down low, they're going to level out and fly straight, drop the torpedo, and then they can wig out, and then the torpedo is going to auto-move during the end turn phase. Your ships and boats have high-altitude flak barrages, but they've got regular AA for if you're flying around low down, they can shoot AA at you from each of the hexes of the boat that aren't dedicated to your high flak. So they've got one other hex that they can kind of drop that in. So it's really neat, but because there's no dice rolling in this is a game purely of initiative, activation, and maneuver. And it's a very different beast from both a lot of aerial combat games because of that, and also just a lot of war games generally, where there's always these elements of unknown and this uncertainty. This is a game that you can get very skilled at. I am not, but it's really interesting and it rewards multiple plays of picking that up and figuring out what you can do with your maneuvers and getting good at those and setting traps for people with multiple formations, triggering lots of dodge activations, and then finishing them all off with someone else coming in. Really, really neat. But honestly, that's how the game works. It is these maneuvers, these rules, and you alternate activations, and it is not more complicated than that. I was really surprised at how easy this was to learn, and what we'll do is we'll wrap up with a few final thoughts. So that was a look at the board. I had an enjoyable time playing this.
Yep.
Again, let's understand what this game is. Mm-hmm. This is a $40 light tactical air war game.
Right.
Right.
But actually, for a $40 light tactical air game, it has a lot of nuance to it. Yeah, it really does.
This is going to sit on a lot of people's tables because it's very accessible compared to a lot of other air war games out there that might rely they lean heavily towards very deep, rich, complicated simulation.
Yeah.
This is so easy to pick up and play, and it has enough of the core principles that you would expect in an aviation game of your turn limitations and movement and things like that.
Yeah.
And the positioning is very key in this one. Trying to hit moving boat targets with your torpedoes,
very
extremely difficult.
It was kind of funny because we talked after it was over, and I realized I had hit you already in the midsection.
Yeah, you dive bombed me, yeah.
And I'm like, dang it, I would have rather bombed them on the ends because it's a little easier to hit.
I think it's easier to dive bomb with precision because you can maneuver your aircraft onto it.
Yep.
But torpedoes, you can launch a bunch of them and then they're autonomous.
Fan out, yeah. They move one tick per.
But I think this game, even though it's a very beer and pretzels-y game, teaches you some really neat principles like that of that's what they would get. Formations of Devastators, launch a bunch of torpedoes, because one of them's going to hit.
Sure.
Even if it turns, something's going to hit something, right? And there are elements of this game that do show some nice little simulation and realism in it, even though it is a 4-page rulebook. I think that's a good job that they did.
I think the only thing I really didn't like was the movement of the ships didn't seem quite right. And what I mean by that, you've got a destroyer that literally has the same movement arc as a huge aircraft carrier. The reality of that aircraft carrier, I feel like it should have been there should have been a handicap on turning it. Felt like you could turn too easily. Yeah, I don't know how to describe what I'm saying.
The handicap on that is that when you turn, you still have that front extra space, which is just swinging around. But but the way they move is effectively identical.
Yeah, it's an
they're just a
axis
little
and you kind
smaller.
of turn. But I also really enjoyed, while I hated it, the anti-aircraft on the boats was very interesting.
Yes.
You place that out at the beginning of the turn?
Yeah, so at the beginning of the turn, you have your high altitude, like, flak barrages that you put out, and you have to designate one of the 2 ship or 3 ship spaces that those originate from. They can be placed 2 hexes out. But then all the other ship spaces can be activated to shoot in or adjacent at low altitude.
Yeah.
We just didn't do a whole lot of that because it never came up.
I think it came
basically.
up one time, and it didn't matter at that point because I was not hit.
But those you can, with the high altitude flak, you can position those
Well, as a screen.
along with the terrain of clouds to make some very interesting screens and stuff,
Yep.
and force people in or around or to dive, and then
Yeah.
if you can work that with your defending planes, you can get some really neat action out of those for sure.
I really like that because I like games that force you to use historically what they had. So that flak and the maneuvering and then even the clouds. The only thing maybe that would have been cool to add is like, where's the sun? But it's not this kind of game.
No, yeah. Then you get into
It's but coming out of the sun always is something important. But overall, very fun game, interesting. I think very rules light.
oh yeah.
You said it perfectly. This is beer and pretzels. This is not.
There is a sheet of solo rules as well.
Yeah.
If you wanted to do that, you can.
I don't know if it's just.
You could, but
But I didn't look at it. Is what I'm saying. I don't know if it has a.
there's a little decision table that you roll on, or don't know if you roll, but like this is what they do
Yeah, there's
for
no
each
dice
of
in
those
the game,
activation. Yeah.
But-
And then there's some little events and things.
I do think one of the strengths of this game is for a small game, it has a lot of scenarios,
Yes.
and they're very different scenarios. You once again, these maps here, I'll show you, and I know we'll do a video of the board itself, but it's just the Pacific, right? It's just
A lot
it's
of
just
it is
blue.
a lot of it is blue.
But on the other side, it has another cloud, so we could have a scenario theoretically where there's another cloud bank. On the backs of some of these, there are, well,
I think it's all the middle ones. Have some
they're
islands on
islands,
them.
and I just like that it has that much uniqueness and variety in what it offers.
Yeah.
Which with as few pieces as possible, with a 4-page rule book, there's a lot of variety here.
Not to wax lyrical, but for a $40 game, this felt like a game that would have come out 10 years ago with how much you get in the box.
Yeah.
Like, many companies would have charged double that for this
Right.
in this day and age. But so I was very impressed of everything that you got in it, and it was also just like an enjoyable, fun.
It was fun.
Light war game,
Yeah.
right? It wasn't particularly intensive or super mega duper serious, but like, you can get into some a little crunchy tactical movement.
Sure.
You can get into that with it.
Oh yeah,
and that's
there's
an
nothing
enjoyable
wrong with
aspect
that.
of it, too.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with counting spaces. It's just it's going to slow the game down. I flipped it wrong, I guess. The other thing that I think is really cool, and we talked about the production. I just like the feel of the game.
Yeah,
From the little
absolutely.
miniature planes to the great, almost comical style of art or comic book style. I mean, these are really cool. But frankly, they even have the smoke and hit markers. That's really very cool.
They did a really nice job of the production value of this game as well.
It just
considering
works.
what it is.
It just works. So, bravo. And I know they have a Fighters of Europe.
Yes.
Or Fighters Over Europe, I believe it's called, coming out on Kickstarter at the end of April. So, this video probably isn't going to post till after that. But
you can either check that out or it's coming soon. Who knows?
Yeah.
when this will get posted. But Fires of the Pacific from Capsisum Games. Check this out if this is something that you're interested. But appreciate you very much for tuning in. I've been Alexander for theplayersaid.com.
And I'm Grant.